Hello everyone, I'm Greg Otta with FedScoop TV. Welcome to our IT Modernization Heroes series. I'm talking with Will Ash, Cisco Systems Senior Director of Security Sales for the U.S. Public Sector. Will, thanks for joining us today.
Yes, thanks for having me, Greg.
So tell me about a success story that you have seen within a government agency making significant headway in IT modernization.
Glad to. This agency has one of the most global and largest and most complex networks in all the federal government.
Okay.
And they were able to succeed by looking at three areas. One is they were able to reduce complexity. The second was they were able to reduce cost. And the third, which we'll get into a little more detail today, is they were able to take advantage and make sure that they had a very secure security posture across their entire global network. So while I can't reference them by name, they are willing to be a reference to those that are interested. But the way it went down was this. They had many contracts across maintenance and subscription items within this vast global network.
Okay, interesting.
And in working with us and modernizing their IT infrastructure, they were able to simplify 50-odd some contracts into one. So that drastically simplified their operations in that regard. Alongside that came the ability to reduce costs tremendously by consolidating various elements of their network and some contractual terms. And the last, I think, which is most exciting, is with a modernized IT infrastructure, they were able to implement what we're calling an integrated threat defense architecture. So they were able to not only address security vulnerabilities in the existing outdated and aged infrastructure, but they're also able to create an infrastructure which would allow them to layer in more advanced threat defense technologies and end-to-end, across the entire attack continuum from a cyber perspective, before, during, and after the attack. So with the infrastructure upgrades, they were able to address all three of those elements.
Interesting. Okay. So Tony Scott and the Obama administration is proposing this $3.1 billion IT modernization revolving fund. What ideas do you have about what agencies could do with this, or what systems are best suited for this IT modernization fund?
Sure. Glad to talk about that. So in the context of that proposed bill, if you read closely, there was a prioritization mechanism. And there's a team of experts that have been put together or proposed to be put together around prioritizing projects. And those would be based on scale, based on impact, and also based on the ability to reduce cyber risks within the aged infrastructure. So in that context, I feel strongly that the place to focus would be on network infrastructure.
Okay.
And places in particular, without getting too technical, would be network switches and network routers. And I say that for a few reasons. If we think about what the network sees, they really see anything from an IT perspective, anything and everything. So the list goes on, but if we rattle off anything you and I work on in our daily lives, whether it's an application, whether it's us as users, whether it's connection to the cloud, whether it's mobile devices, whether it's virtualized containers, on and on and on and on, the network is core to all of that. And within the network, there, as we talked about before in the use case, there are innate vulnerabilities in age infrastructure, just in their current state. Those would be addressed by addressing the network. And the second part would be the ability, as we mentioned before, to integrate and layer in more advanced threat defense technologies, or really this integrated threat defense. And that's really where the magic comes in, where if you look at an integrated threat defense architecture, that the different elements across that attack continuum I mentioned, before and during and after the attack, the ability to leverage the interconnect and integration of that really would be a multiplier effect as far as the investments associated with that fund for the agencies.
Okay. So federal IT managers recognize an urgent need to modernize their systems, of course, but what has to change in order to accelerate this IT modernization?
Gotcha. Two things come to mind, Greg. One, I think the agencies should, instead of refreshing infrastructure for the sake of refresh, they should quickly attach that need to the mission of the agency. Okay. And every agency's mission is different, of course. However, there's some common threads, whether it's around innovating faster, creating different experiences for not only the citizens, but the workforce as well. That's one. The second, of course, is some parts of missions are associated with reducing costs or reducing complexity. And the third, which you talked a bunch about today, is this notion of reducing risk.
Right.
So to the extent the agencies can make a hard-line connection between the need for infrastructure upgrade and the mission of the agency, that will absolutely stand to accelerate deployment of replacing this aged infrastructure. The second part, it's relevant mostly to the reducing risk part. And an area that we've been studying is IT departments' inclination to separate budget between straight network budget and breaking out a security budget.
Okay.
So as it doesn't all get grouped together, if the budget can be split to have a cyber-specific budget and a network-specific budget, there'd be acceleration associated there with regards to replacing the infrastructure.
So with all of this infrastructure talk, how do advances in cloud services and containerization, how have you seen that change the way agencies are, their outlook and their plans for their IT modernization packages in 12, 18 months? And how does, infrastructure really, modernizing that infrastructure, how does that factor in as well?
Right, great question. We all know the advances that the areas you mentioned, whether it's cloud, agile development, containerization,
right.
virtualization, et cetera. I'm going to layer a few in there as well.
Sure.
We know that the advances that are helping us as citizens, us as a country, even in the commercial space of our world. I'm going to layer in a couple other thoughts for you. So let's talk about cloud real quick.
Okay.
Cloud, we're seeing in excess of 500 cloud applications per organization, massive, and increasing every day.
Wow, okay.
Furthermore, we're seeing an increase of 44% of cloud workloads on an annual basis, just massive, massive numbers. The two others that you didn't mention are the notion of mobile. Mobile right now, our smartphones that are probably in both of our pockets, mobile right now is consuming in excess of 50% of the traffic that goes across IP networks.
Wow, okay.
Massive. And every entire knowledge worker has an average of 3.3 devices.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot for sure. You probably have more. But nonetheless, that's the other piece. And the other one that's very applicable to the federal government is this notion of the Internet of Everything, or IoT,
right.
where we have more and more connected devices. The latest count is there'll be 55 billion connected devices by 2020. And the increase in machine-to-machine traffic going over the IP network is growing at rates similar to that I mentioned around mobile. And if we think about that in the federal space, whether it's devices on warfighters' helmets, devices in vehicles, energy grid, smart cities, your mind can start to wander. Nonetheless, getting back to your question, those advances are great. They're wonderful for the mission of the agencies. But along with that opportunity clearly comes increased risk.
Right.
And the increased risk can be characterized this way. Number one, there's no clear edge or boundary anymore, or a perimeter like we used to know. So that creates some cyber challenges. Next, the attack surface of any given entity is just ballooning and growing, and it's become very, very massive. Furthermore, the number of attack vectors for the bad actors has increased substantially.
Right.
So along with all the opportunity, which is fantastic, agencies, organizations need to be very cognizant of the need to increase their security posture in that regard.
Very, very interesting conversation. Well, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Greg. It's fun to be here.